Trigger warning for brief mentions of sexual assault, misogyny, and queerphobia in the entire video. Hi, we had SD card issues during filming and some of our footage got corrupted, mainly in the first 20 minutes. We cooked up this shitty little animation that you should be seeing on screen somewhere as a replacement. We're sorry about that, it'll go away soon. Being able to write and tell stories of our own has been an important topic for queer people all around the world. One area where this is reflected is in manga, specifically Boyslove. Boyslove, a gay romance genre, has historically had a majority of female fans. There have been long-running debates about this basically since BL has existed. The debates about BL's readership are often as, or maybe even more, prominent than the genre itself. Like many hot topics, Boyslove is surrounded in a dense web of discourse. Many queer people feel strongly that the large female readership of Boyslove has an adverse effect on real queer people, and likewise, many of the female readers feel equally strongly that they have a right to participate in this genre and that they are being gatekept out of a fandom/genre of media that they have a right to be in. I, myself, as a queer person, an avid BL reader, have often had a bad taste in my mouth at the thought of, especially straight, female readers. When I realized I couldn't quite articulate why this rubbed me the wrong way, I decided to try and dig into the topic and figure out what was going on. That's what this video is, me trying to get a grasp on my own feelings of the topic by finding as much information as I could about everyone and everything involved and then trying to form it into a coherent narrative. Disclaimer. Now, as I just said, the discourse is hot and the ice is thin, so it's disclaimer time. This is a pretty intense and long-running discussion that has very entrenched sides. Because all of this is so touchy, I need to be pretty careful with my words. I've done my best to establish clear-ish definitions and stick to them, but I'm pretty sure I've made a few mistakes while writing this video. If you notice anything or disagree with my definitions, please feel to write that out in the comments. Have mercy though. That being said, here are the main things I think need clarifying. First of all, what is Boyslove? For this video, I'm using Boyslove to refer to romance mangas featuring two men. I'm aware that other words like yaoi, shonen, or bara have specific meanings of their own and might be more applicable in some situations, but I'm choosing to just say Boyslove, or BL, to make my job easier and because the distinction, largely, isn't important for the point I'm trying to make. Gay isn't the same as queer. Not all queer people are gay, and not all queer people are men. An important thing to keep in mind during this video, and in general, is that not all queer people are gay men. Gay men are a subset of the community, and sometimes it is important to distinguish between the two. Feminist versus feminist. For the topic of this video, feminism is a central talking point that the whole debate revolves around. I am assuming you have a basic familiarity with feminist theory for this video. If not, go Google patriarchy, feminism, and Emma Goldman. Also, in the larger discourse web surrounding BL, there are a lot of opinions, and a lot of those opinions consider themselves to be feminist. I am not able or willing to call some of the theories presented feminist because I think they are the opposite of feminism. However, due to the fact that considering themselves feminist is a central aspect of these arguments, I have chosen to call them feminists, in quotes. For the length of this video, feminists, in quotes, refers to people who consider themselves, and their theories, feminist, but whom I would not. I am aware of the issues with this, and I discuss them towards the end of the video. However, it is the best I could think of, so we just got to deal with that. Presentation, then evaluation. My goal with this video is to examine why this debate is so heated, and in order to do that, I think it is necessary to take a look at and compare arguments from both sides of the coin. The way this video is structured, I will be going through arguments I found from both sides respectfully, and then comparing them at the end. That means I will initially be presenting arguments without evaluating them. That part comes later, I promise. Biased evaluation. I am queer, I am MLM aligned, and I am not a woman. That means I'm definitely biased in this whole thing. I've done my best to research both sides' arguments and present them fairly, and I've also had this script proofread by various other people, and also specifically women who read BL. There's still definitely going to be things I forgot, didn't see, or didn't think was important during this thing, and I'm sorry about that in advance. If you feel I forgot something, please feel free to let me know in the comments, but again, I'm just one guy, and I'm doing my best here. Discourse, not history. This video is not about the history or terminology of BL. I am neither willing nor able to give you a detailed accounting of the history of BL. If that's what you are looking for, sorry, but this isn't the video for that. On recommendation from a friend, I'm also adding this. This video is about BL in Western countries as it relates to queerness and feminism. This isn't a fandom analysis. This isn't a cross-culture comparison between BL in the West and in Japan. I am neither qualified nor interested in talking about either of those things. My friend pointed out that the attitudes of Japanese BL readers can differ strongly to Western readers, especially in terms of politics, and that can have certain interesting implications and effects. I do think it would be interesting to hear about this, but I am not the guy to make that video for you. Also, I apologize in advance for my pronunciations of Asian names. I'm doing my best, but if you come from one of the countries I mentioned, speak any of the languages, or for any other reason know how these words are supposed to be pronounced, I'm terribly sorry. The numbers. Women do read BL. Before we get into talking about why women read BL, I think it's a good idea to establish that a significant amount of women do actually read BL. It's the center of the debate and one of the first things that's brought up about BL, so it's not exactly news to anyone, but let's look at some lovely numbers I found to have something to go off of. The numbers are pulled from multiple, 6 to be exact, surveys, papers, etc. It's important to keep in mind that these surveys were conducted by different people, often in different countries, with different languages and different methodologies. That means the data may not be necessarily cross-compatible. Also, these are only 6 data points, so it's possibly and probably not necessarily representative for BL readers overall, and also specifically to the situation that you find yourself in. And a lot of these surveys tend to cover the same places, so there are a lot of English language surveys, but nothing from South America, for example. The idea here is more to create a rough sketch of gender, and at some point in the video, sexuality, demographics. Next to the pie charts, you will be seeing a number. That number will lead you to a source in the description. Also, overall in the video, if a number is showing up on screen, it's a source you can check out. Anyway, onto the numbers. Blue on the chart means male readers, pink is female. For easy readability, I'm sticking to the gendered colors. Sorry. Starting with the first one, online survey, 42% female readers. Next up, 86% female North American readers, 89% female English-speaking European readers, 82% female Italian readers, 82% female Hungarian readers, and 88.9% female Chinese readers, 83.4% female English-speaking readers, and coming right after that is 89% female English-speaking readers and 87% female Italian readers. And for the last study, 82 to 89% female readers. On the pie chart, I put it as 85.5. Like I said, a lot of English language and a surprising amount of Italian. Looking at these numbers, there is a pretty clear trend. The amount of male readers is at its highest 58%, so slightly over half, and at its lowest just 9%. The average is 82.38% female readers, or just 17.62% male readers. So, based on these numbers, it is definitely a good call to say that a majority of BL readers are female. The numbers here also track pretty well with my personal experience and the way I've seen other people talk about BL demographics. This, of course, leads us to the next question. What is it that so many women are getting from reading BL? Why are they reading BL? Why do women read BL? That's the segment title. It's smooth transition, right? Now, the reason I'm talking about demographics in my little discourse video is because I think the most charged and important parts of the debate can be traced back to root causes, aka I'm building a foundation for us to work on. I don't think I need to explain why queer people read BL. I've literally never seen a single person write anything wondering why queer people read BL. It's just kind of automatically understood. I do, however, think that these things are less clear and less articulated for female readers of BL. There are lots of papers and articles about this topic. In fact, I'd wager to say most non-fan BL media is about the fact mostly women read BL and then wondering why that is. As I said earlier, I believe there are certain root causes or pressures that are driving a lot of the behavior shown in the discourse. In order to understand the reasons this debate keeps going so hot, we need to understand the pressures that are driving both sides. So, why do women read BL? What is their Leidensdruck, as the Germans would say? I'm not just being pretentious there, by the way. I do actually speak German fluently. The reasons given vary, both between individual and study, but if you boil it down, the main reason is sexism and women trying to get away from it. I am dead serious when I say the reasons women read BL is basically 15 shades of the patriarchy with a side of gender-based violence. Sexism and the patriarchy affect every level of our society, including the media that is produced. In said media, women are often over-sexualized, underdeveloped, and barely afforded any personality, and depicted purely to suit the male gaze. Bearing this in mind, the reasons given make a lot more sense. One of the most common causes for reading BL is the pure love motive, basically that gay romance evades sexism by not having any women in it. In doing so, Boyslove creates an idealized equal relationship without the power dynamics of a heterosexual relationship and the removal of oppressive female gender roles. Another thing that Boyslove does is remove any woman to be jealous of. This is a thing that can happen since the patriarchy places a woman's value in how desirable she is, which invariably leads to comparison to other women. Thus, when consuming media, a subconscious comparison can happen, which can't happen if there are no other women to compare yourself to. A further side effect of the patriarchy is that it relegates women to a submissive role, both in the bedroom and in everyday life. Due to the fact that there is no woman female readers are supposed to be identifying with, female readers can pick whether or not they identify with a dominant or submissive character. This also plays into the next 2 points. Firstly, that being submissive is often portrayed in a positive light. A quote, "Masculinity works differently in BL manga, precisely because the reification that happens in men's comics, both to the women and the submissive male in men's comics, does not happen. Even the most feminized uke is not endowed narratively or pictorially with a negative or disempowered position." This also plays into the next point, which is just a dislike for standard romances, which stems from how heterosexual media is often based on unrealistic tropes that portray idealized or stereotyped relationships, often with women as submissive and men as dominant actors, which, among other reasons, often leads to many women having an aversion for standard romances. And lastly, many women read BL because they like the aesthetics and because it's a good way to make friends and connect with others. The single point that shows up the most, though, is that BL functions as escapism, or that the draw is that it is detached from one's own reality. This makes sense. It's basically the culmination of all the other points. What I find funny, however, is just how much more strongly this is brought up. Every other claim usually has 1, sometimes 2 sources. This one claim has 6. A really good quote to sum this section up is from novelist Kaoru Kurimoto in the original 1992 BL debate in A Feminist Sign. Kurimoto said that women are constantly classified based on how they look, how they fulfill female gendered functions, how they perform as home maintenance machines, how much added value they are perceived to have, and how fresh they are, and speculated that these women imagine yaoi to be a place where the gaze of men and society doesn't exist, and where they themselves, always the object of that gaze, don't exist either. I think this desire to escape from the patriarchy is a really important thing that has to be kept in mind during the entire rest of the video. Nobody ever exists in a vacuum. There's always context. However, I think this context is especially relevant for analyzing the debate around BL. This isn't just a, oh, women happen to read BL and experience sexism at the same time. The fact that women experience sexism and experience it strongly is the driving cause for why they are reading BL. This is the Leidensdruck I mentioned earlier, the pressure that motivates certain actions and that influences how some people might choose to respond to a situation. I mentioned earlier that it's just generally kind of assumed to be understood why queer or gay people read BL. That's why it doesn't have a segment. However, just to be sure, I would also like to point out that queer people are also experiencing discrimination, and that experience is a similar Leidensdruck to what the female readers have, and does also have an effect on behavior, media consumption, and how people choose to engage in debates. I'm not really sure if I will include that last bit because I don't want to detract from giving the reasons why women read BL the space it deserves, but I'm also worried that not attaching the last bit would make it sound like only women are influenced by various environmental factors. And I'm not sure I'm confident enough in the internet's reading levels to gauge how to handle this, so, you know. The discourse. So, Moving into the discourse section of the video, I'd like to explain how I set this video up. As we are all well aware, this is a really complicated debate with a lot of facets. In order to try and illustrate the lines here, I decided to split the debate between a queer and feminist perspective because I think those are the two sides, heavy quotes, at play here. However, both of these sides are also further fractured and both split into two further categories for slightly different reasons. Starting with the feminist side, I think it is a split between feminist readings for female readership, aka arguing why reading BL is advantageous for women, and feminist readings against queer ownership, aka why BL as a genre should not or does not have to align itself with queer views or opinions. Please note the distinction between ownership and readership. I have never seen anyone argue queer people shouldn't read BL. As far as I can tell, it's only ever about queer people's right to criticize or exert ownership of the genre. The queer argument, however, focuses on different things. Queer analysis tends to be less focused on ownership of the genre, because it is assumed, and more on potential positive or negative effects for queer people. Non-queer female BL readers show up in this debate as either a net positive, normalizing queer relationships or queerness itself, or a net negative, further stereotyping queerness. I am now going to illustrate the arguments for all of these areas of thought. At the end of the video, I'm going to evaluate them and compare them to each other to try and draw a conclusion. I do not necessarily agree with all the arguments I'm about to present. I'm bringing them up because we are trying to understand the thought processes that are going on with both sides of the debate so that we can figure out where this is coming from and how to deal with it. I tried my best to write that segment in a way that doesn't make me sound like a dirty centrist. I'm not sure if I succeeded. Feminist readings for female readership. So, feminist readings for female readership of BL are pretty much exclusively about examining or explaining the positive effects of reading BL for women. This kind of overlaps with the Why Women Read BL in the First Place section. Obviously, they are getting something from it, so certain points from that section could also certainly fit in here. The main idea is that BL exists so that women can escape from the patriarchy, therefore, by escaping the patriarchy, they are acting against it. The idea of acting against the patriarchy by reading BL also shows up in the fact that in modern society, women are largely expected to be pure, devoid of sexuality or sexual desire, and that reading BL is a direct rebellion against that notion of purity. One really interesting thing I encountered is the idea that because this idea of purity or chastity exists, BL is read in order to allow fans to disassociate from their own desires and project them onto male characters. Basically, they are avoiding having female desire by rerouting that desire over male characters. So, BL functions as a way to separate yourself from your own desires. The idea that BL is, in part, read due to it inherently being unreal for women actually shows up quite a lot in the sources I read. Now, the next claim I do not have a source for. I am dead certain I had one at some point, but I for the life of me can't find it. I think this point kind of functions as an extension of a previous point, which is why I am including it, but also no source, so take it with a grain of salt. The argument is that BL is a safe way for women to interact with sexuality. This can be due to the separation from the self I just mentioned, or how there is no female partner to experience gender-based discrimination, or any other thing. Again, no source, but I did think it was worth bringing up because it is kind of all of the other points I've brought up so far distilled into one. And finally, Boyslove shows that a couple doesn't have to be made up of different genders, and that the qualities of the individuals don't have to be based upon cultural gender differences or stereotypes. Now, if you are familiar with Boyslove, then you probably have heard the term fujoshi before. Just in case you haven't, fujoshis are female fans of BL media. Male fans of BL are called fudonashi. The term fujoshi literally means rotten girl and is a pun on the Japanese word fujoshi, which means respectable woman.
The term was originally used as a pejorative, but has since been reclaimed by BL fans. That reclaiming bit becomes important later, so keep that in mind. Some feminist readings of BL argue that fujoshi is a subversive term that empowers women. A quote from Christy Kawano. Beyond the pages even, by labeling themselves fujoshi, BL fans prevent others from sticking a different label on them. With this subversive term, they voluntarily cut themselves off from the demands of the world of men, with rotten making it clear that they are no longer for male consumption. These readings also can argue that the rotten in Rotten Girls comes from not having stereotypically feminine interests. The main point that is being made here is that the term fujoshi is a slur for women, and that by reclaiming it, women or female readers of BL are being empowered. For a while, I kind of struggled with these arguments, because for me it was reading like they simply assumed that reading BL is empowering itself, which kind of threw me off. Because in order to be empowering, it would have to have some kind of beneficial or liberatory effect on women, and I wasn't able to see where that was coming from. I think it starts to make sense if we consider the positive aspects of reading BL for female readers, and especially the idea that reading BL is a means for readers to subvert or escape the patriarchy. Basically, reading BL helps women cope with or avoid the patriarchy. Calling themselves fujoshi enables women to deflect or deal with the shame associated with reading gay soft porn, and calling themselves fujoshi helps women cope with or avoid the patriarchy. So women calling themselves fujoshi is a good or empowering thing. The main point of the argument in this section can be boiled down to reading Boyslove is beneficial to women by letting them escape or subvert the patriarchy, and the term fujoshi enables women to read Boyslove. Feminist readings against queer ownership. As I said in the intro of this video, feminist readings are often preoccupied with arguing against queer ownership of the genre. This is an attempt to address queer criticisms of the genre. The main way that I saw that happening was by discounting or discrediting queer opinions. That's where the title of this section comes from, readings against queer ownership. I was thinking about what to call my sections because, basic video structure. I was considering calling this part readings against queer criticism, and I also thought about readings for female ownership because I think that sounds less negative. I decided against both of these because I believe the following arguments are mostly centered around arguing why queer opinions are invalid, not engaging with those criticisms. Arguments for why this is a female genre do exist, but as far as I could tell, they are not the majority of the arguments. Also, Boyslove being a female genre would not in itself discredit queer opinions, which is what a large chunk of the argument is trying to do. I think the bulk of the arguments is trying to argue why queer opinions are irrelevant to the genre, so that's why I called the section what it is called. Also, this is a reminder that this is not the opinion part of the video, so I'm trying to formulate all of this as neutrally and matter-of-factly as possible. I'm aware that some of the stuff I just said sounds kind of bad, and I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible, but I'm also trying to be honest with you, and that's what I think is going on here. One of the main ways I saw queer opinions being discounted is what I call the Western card. Basically, the idea is that criticism from Western people, or Westerners, is irrelevant because we are dealing with a Japanese genre with a completely different cultural background than the people who are criticizing it. This argument is something I didn't see as much in papers or studies or more academic stuff, but it was quite frequent in forums like Reddit or Tumblr. Basically, informal fan conversations or debates is where this showed up as opposed to more academic stuff. Now, I call it the Western card, but there are a few variations that show up, stuff like Anglo fans or international fans, etc. I decided to slam all of these into a single point because they are all fundamentally trying to say the same thing, they're just using different words. The most common single argument I saw is that BL simply isn't made for the gays, and thusly isn't theirs to criticize. Now, on a factual level, BL is made for women. Looking back at the stats I pulled earlier, male readership, on average, is about 17%. Pretty much anything I ever read is in agreement that BL is made for and by straight women. This argument also goes hand in hand with the idea that BL simply isn't meant to represent real gay men. Just to be sure, one argument is saying that this was not made for queer people, and the other argument is saying that this wasn't meant to represent queer people. Both of these arguments show up very frequently, mostly when BL's representation of queer people and queerness is criticized. Both of these arguments are perfectly distilled into this quote from
สถาพร พาณิชรักษาพงษ์
the managing director of GMMTV, a Thai television production and talent agency that produces BL. In BL series produced by GMMTV, the two male leads need to have masculine characteristics. Our target is heterosexual women. They want to see two real men have a sweet romance with each other. They don't want to see any of the boys look too feminine. That's why when we cast actors, we need to make sure that none of them look effeminate. We are not doing gay series. We also don't need to include so many sex scenes. If we include a lot of sex scenes, we would be attracting a gay audience. That guy's just a business executive, right? Dirty fucking capitalist. Fuck him. But the argument being brought here is made by other people too. They tend to be an exception, but I have seen a few people cite market demographics as a justification for why BL isn't made for the gays. This may be the dirty socialist talking, but Megacorp Loves Me More is a crazy card to play. The fundamental idea here, however, is still the same. BL isn't made for queer people, so it's none of their business. One argument that I find really interesting, however, is the idea that, at least in part, gay criticisms of the female readers of BL are coming from misogyny. This idea showed up really late into my research process, and I was really happy to find it because it gives this whole section a lot more nuance. A quote from Christine Michael L. Santos and Thomas Bondinet. We believe that the invalidation of heterosexual and by extension queer women's participation in the fandom, which is dismissed as fetishistic, emerges from an ideological system that intends to maintain patriarchal authority over Philippine queer spaces. This quote is referring specifically to the Philippines. However, I very much believe that it has relevancy to the larger debate. To understand this quote and my point, it's very important to understand the idea of intersectionality. Intersectionality is the idea that different factors and their interactions play a role into a person's privilege or lack of it in society. These factors can, for example, be race, class, age, gender, sexuality, disabilities, etc. The basic idea here is that these different avenues of oppression not only coexist, but actively influence each other. So for example, a black woman experiences both racism and sexism. However, she experiences racism differently than a black man would, and she experiences sexism differently than a white woman would. This is because the forms of oppression intersect, hence the name, and influence each other, forming a more complicated situation than just racism and sexism coexisting. This is also where the idea of intersectionality comes from. It was formed to reflect the lived experiences of black women, which were neither being addressed by white feminism or the, at that point, male-dominated black liberation movement. The term itself was coined by Shimberley Crenshaw, an American civil rights advocate and scholar of critical race theory, in 1989. The way that this becomes relevant for us, besides intersectionality's relevancy to literally everything all the time, is due to the fact that gay men, despite themselves being victims of patriarchal violence, expectations, and structures, are still men and thusly indoctrinated into the patriarchy and are also able to profit from it. This is kind of a whole thing. Gay men very much are able to be sexist and display extremely harmful behavior, sentiment, and rhetoric that can give their cishet counterparts a run for their money. Now, I think the reasons and mechanisms at play here are really complicated and really interesting, but I have not really read my way into this topic, so I'm not able to give a nice long analysis of this. I'm aware that this is a bit of a cop-out, but this is a topic that both deserves and needs to be treated with respect, and that involves a lot of work. I'm currently not able to perform that work, trust me, this video is already a beast, but I more than welcome any thoughts or observations on this in the comments. If I happen to find, or get recommended, any good further readings on this topic, I'll include them in a pinned comment. I'll also try and correct any mistakes I made in the pinned comment, so keep your eye out for that. It's probably going to be hella juicy. Although I can't give a well-articulated reasoning on this, I do very much think that gay men's sexism is a factor at play here. I just can't tell you how much or where exactly. I have one more quote that I think brings up two really interesting points. When women are sexual, it is assumed to be deviant and thus of research interest. When men are sexual, it is normal and expected and obviously not of research interest. So the first point is that female sexuality is seen as inherently deviant, which it is. If we look back to my "Why do women read BL?", a pretty large factor is the fact that women are expected to be pure, aka devoid of sexuality, and then, for various reasons, living or seeking out that sexuality with BL. The reason I'm including this quote here is because it's also kind of a meta commentary on this whole debate. Nobody's writing video essays about why straight men watch lesbian porn. A lot of people have feelings about that for good fucking reason, but as far as I can tell, there aren't shit tons of papers and articles and videos about that. It's just kind of inherently understood why a straight man would want to consume opposite sex homosexual erotica. Like, it's not even something worth talking about. In comparison, women doing the exact same thing through mangas, but sparks a huge debate and controversy. And in case that isn't obvious, this also applies to me. I am also making a very long video essay about this topic. This also ends up in the other point I wanted to make, namely that female fans are usually not taken that seriously, especially if their consumption of something involves attraction of any kind. And this isn't like a BL or manga or erotica exclusive thing, it's just kind of a thing in general. Like, female fans of K-pop are seen as stupid and shallow, but male fans of sports are not, even though functionally it's the same thing. Getting really excited about some millionaires that don't know you exist and spending way too much money on merch in an industry that is entirely dominated by money and basically nothing else. The only difference between K-pop fans and male sports fans is that I have not been assaulted by drunk K-pop fans, but I very much have by fucking soccer fans. And K-pop fans also don't make city centers uninhabitable on the regular. We've been joined by a cat. Can we cut some bits in? Perfect. Cat. Her name is Josie. She's really old. She has no teeth. This is even to the point that things liked by teenage girls are rejected by larger society until the teenage girls move on. Good example for this is Frank Sinatra. You know who Frank Sinatra is. He's the Fly Me to the Moon guy. What you probably didn't know, I sure didn't, was that he spawned a whole subculture that was intense enough to start riots. The subculture was called Bobby Soxers and consisted mainly of teenage girls but also young women. They started popping up in the mid to late 1940s. They were controversial because their style of dress diverged from earlier ideals of feminine beauty. Now, they weren't just controversial because of how they dressed, but also because parents feared that their Bobby Soxer children's infatuation would impact their burgeoning sexuality and taint their innocence. Newsweek called it a mass sexual delirium, while other sources wrote the Bobby Soxers off as juvenile delinquents and immoral. Again, this is about Bobby Sinatra. If you played Bobby Sinatra in front of your grandparents today, you would probably get a rant about the good old days and how people used to dress properly and behave well, and they had real music and none of this teenage idol crap. And the things said about him, children being confused about sexuality, mass craziness, and a rise in juvenile delinquents, probably sounds familiar to you, both from reactions to musicians like Elvis or the Beatles, or general moral panics, or also specifically about BL. The things said about BL aren't new, like at all. Anything involving sexuality is going to get people riled up, and anything teenage girls like is automatically perceived as stupid and shallow. This is a very real phenomena, and it's definitely at play with BL. To sum up this section and put it into context with the previous section, if reading Boyslove is seen as beneficial for women because it lets them escape or subvert the patriarchy, then the arguments in this section assert that queer opinions are irrelevant to female enjoyment or the benefits women gain from consuming BL, and that female sexuality and enjoyment of media are both repressed and demonized. These two factors combine to have the effect that criticism of BL are seen as either irrelevant, not coming from the target audience, aka straight women, or illegitimate, sexist critique. I think this is, at least in part, where the tone of these discussions comes from, because they feel very annoyed, this doesn't matter, why is this being brought up again, or defensive, they are trying to undermine my/our enjoyment of this genre I enjoy. This is more of an observation to help illustrate the mindset these arguments are coming from, not a factual statement, but I think these arguments are coming from people who see men encroaching on a female space and place little to no emphasis on the queer aspect of criticism. That's not what we're going to be doing though, because the next section is about the queer takes on BL. Queer analysis of BL as beneficial. So just like every other section of this video, the queer bit starts with some elaboration as well. The feminist arguments we just looked at are focused mainly around trying to explain and justify women's consumption of BL. Queer argument, on the other hand, is centered around if BL is beneficial or harmful to queer people. While writing this video, I tried to talk to lots of different people about the topic to try and get exposed to as many different ideas as possible, and one thing I noticed is that the feelings of queer people about BL are pretty much always extremely complicated. There wasn't a single person I talked to about my video idea that didn't have some kind of take preloaded, or that wasn't more than willing to engage with my thoughts in great detail. And usually, that detail wasn't usually pro or contra BL, but instead a very nuanced and specific mix of opinions, thoughts, and observations. As for the obligatory disclaimer, I am not every queer person. There are definitely things I've missed, not thought of, or failed to give proper weight. The following arguments are my best attempt to categorize and recognize arguments that I think are relevant to the larger debate. As usual, if you think I got something wrong or missed something, write a comment. Be nice though. Starting off with the most obvious, self-identification. Everybody likes having characters like themselves, and that obviously also applies to queer people. It's why I read BL, it might be why you do too. Having people and characters like you is a fundamental human need. It's why queer people have been fighting for so long to tell our stories, and it's why there are queer headcanons for every piece of media under the sun. Lots of people read BL to see someone like themselves be themselves. Seeing a character like you, whatever that happens to mean, can help alleviate feelings of loneliness and anxiety, and it's something else entirely to read a story that relates to your lived experiences in some way. BL provides this self-identification in more ways than one. Not only does it provide representation to cis gay men, it can also serve that role for female readers that might identify more with dominant roles, something that society denies women categorically. It can also serve as a way to figure out you are queer in itself. I've heard several stories of people figuring out that they are transmasc because they read BL. BL can also function as a gateway into queerness as a topic itself. A friend of mine pointed out through BL's popularity with non-queer women that it can function as a judgment-free gateway into the topic. Not only that, but because of BL's dominance in fandom, a baby queer who is in the closet interacting with anything fandom will basically guarantee them encountering ideas of queerness. I think this is a really interesting and kind of funny point, because the very thing so hotly debated about BL, its large non-queer female readership, is actually the thing that provides it its, in my opinion, largest benefit. Figuring out you are queer is hard as hell. Being queer ain't a picnic in the park either. Anything that makes it easier for people to recognize who they are, and maybe even makes it easier for them to be that person, is amazing and something we should support. That's also a next-door neighbor of one of the arguments most often brought up, namely that BL helps to normalize queerness to a wider audience. The argument hinges on the idea, and observation, that people are more open to things they are familiar with, and BL is hugely popular with heterosexual audiences. Stands to reason that it could have the effect of turning queer people from a danger lurking in the night to your favorite romance story. I don't really have much to elaborate here. There aren't really that many numbers on how much BL has led to cultural shifts in attitude toward queerness, and the argument is, I think, fairly self-explanatory. I, however, don't want my lack of paragraphs to hide the fact that this is the thing that shows up the most, both from queer people and straight women who read BL. This is tangentially related to a point I have seen exactly once, but I think it's interesting, so I'm going to include it. So if you don't know what Omegaverse is, look it up, but basically it's got more genders. From what I've heard, it's very rapey and men can get pregnant. That's the basis. One source mentioned that Omegaverse allows homosexuals to indulge the idea of having kids and raises social awareness about the topic of queer adoption, which is a real one. Adopting kids as a queer person is either straight up not possible or way more harder than it would be for non-queer folk. I personally have never heard that brought up in relation to Omegaverse, which doesn't necessarily mean that much, but I think it's a kind of funny point. It's my video, and so I included it. A really interesting point I saw is related to why straight men read BL. The patriarchy imposes roles, behaviors, and rules onto women, but it very much does the same for men. We are having a bit of a masculinity crisis at the moment, and the old gender roles aren't what they used to be. For the record, what the old gender roles used to be was shit. The nuclear family has never and will never work. Female emancipation is a net positive in every single tangible way for everybody. Gender essentialism is bullshit, and forcing people into made-up categories based on their genitalia is a recipe for disaster and just does not fucking work. It just doesn't. Anybody telling you about how much better it used to be is ignoring metric tons of marital rape, child abuse, child neglect, both in an emotional and physical sense, and the intense amount of psychological stress placed on all parties involved due to the financial and emotional isolation, and the sheer amount of husbands that were killed by their wives because they were abusive cunts and divorce wasn't an option. It's also ignoring a fuck ton of wives that were killed by their husbands because men aren't allowed to have emotions and or taught how to deal with those emotions. So overall, bad for everyone. The old gender roles also really aren't that fucking old. The nuclear family came into being after World War II over conservatives throwing a tantrum. It didn't even last 50 years before burning itself down, and quite frankly, it's taking down the fucking world with it. Historically, humans have lived in extended social networks made up of both family members and community members that live nearby. Reducing the entire depth of community into a two-person tag team that's supposed to do what historically has been done in extended families, communities, or villages is a shit idea that was invented by conservatives who have literally never been right about anything ever, and who have spent the entirety of human history trying to make sure someone's got it worse than them, instead of getting a fucking grip and trying to make the world a better place for anyone. Modern conservatives are pulling the same shit as always, but it is becoming increasingly clear that relationships based on dominion don't work, and that an ideal of masculinity built on power, coercion, and control isn't going to stand the test of time. Luckily for conservatives, however, their playbook still works. In times of crisis that they usually cause, the easiest thing to do is call for a return to how it used to be, the good old days. Sadly for everybody else and the entirety of society, that shit's working. Fuckers like Andrew Tate, Ben Shapiro, and Elon Musk are pulling in droves of young men that are then weaponized to make sure top-level pedophiles never show up on any lists. This video was written in July of 2025, by the way. Trump's currently trying to cover up the Epstein list. Probably still at it when I release this. Amidst this cultural isolation of masculinity, men looking for models of masculinity that aren't Nazis gotta get a bit creative. In much the same way that some women might not relate to subbing in a relationship and come to BL to relate to the other partner, some men might not relate to the dominant or controlling roles that are prescribed by the dominant idea of masculinity. Now, BL does something very interesting with masculinity. I'm ripping this point straight from a paper by John Francis called What's So Queer About Boys Bonking?
a queer analysis of gender normativity and homophobia in Japanese boys love manga. In order to look at the argument, we need to contrast masculinity in boys love and in real life. In real life, masculinity is often constructed around power, coercion, and control. The power and control is over women, and everything else, and the persons being coerced are also women, or underage kids if you're a politician of any right-wing organization apparently. In this ideological framework, the amount of masculinity someone has is directly tied to how much power you hold over others, not just women, but especially. Additionally to this, your worth as a person is directly tied to how masculine, speak powerful, you are. This is a direct incentive to display the signs of masculinity as loudly as possible and distance yourself as far as possible from anything feminine or non-masculine. The point that John Francis makes is that while the relationship between the seme, the dominant partner, and the uke, the submissive partner, replicates heteronormative standards and imitates a male-female dynamic, the feminine partner is regarded as equal, not lesser than. This is contrasted by John Francis with a gay comic depicting a chubby, traditionally unattractive character who seeks to pleasure the athletic and attractive baseball team. A quote, McEllen describes the younger chubby character as enjoying his role, but in context, his subordination, his feminization, results in the loss of male patriarchal power as he spiritually inhibits, albeit willingly, the female position. Despite the character's willingness to cross from the masculine to the feminine, the trouble is, rather than a cross on equal grounds, this crossing is impossible to see as anything other than a loss, something less than male. Thus, this men's comic reifies the female position as a loss, as something less than male. The destiny for men who fail to achieve the proper masculinity, they become not men, which is further established through the persisting stereotype of the gay man as feminine. Basically, in other media, both homo and heterosexual, feminine roles are a negative thing and result in loss of power for the person experiencing. In boys love, however, this does not happen. Neither the narrative nor the way the scene is shown suggests that this is a negative or disempowering thing. What's more, the uke is actively shown to enjoy the sex, which breaks with traditional views of sex as something that is inflicted upon women, not something both partners enjoy and participate in. This not only provides a functionally totally different model of masculinity, but it also gives both male and female readers the opportunity to relate to both the seme and the uke, thusly further deconstructing gender binaries. Not only can BL provide characters to identify with, it can also show us how a better world might be possible. BL is escapism. That's the function it serves for female readers, that's the function it serves for queer readers. In a world that's rapidly going down the shitter, it makes sense to want to see two people just falling in love and having issues that aren't a direct consequence of the social erosion that is the inevitable consequence of neoliberalism. BL shows that a relationship doesn't have to be made up of different genders, and that the qualities of the individuals in that relationship doesn't have to be based upon cultural gender differences. This point, by the way, showed up in exactly the same way in the Why Do Women Read BL section, but it applies here too. So, BL also shows us a world where emotions and true love can beat traditional social norms, gender constructs, financial situations, and social expectations. It's a world where you don't have to look over your shoulder, there aren't protests against your existence, and you get adequate medical care, and you aren't constantly hearing about people like you getting killed. By showing us this better world, this more inclusive and fair world, it gives us something to aspire to. The nature and virtue of escapist media is that by showing us how it could be better, it is also directly showing us the failures of our current world, thereby giving us something to work towards. Queer analysis of BL as harmful. So before we get into queer criticisms of boys love, I'd like to get one thing out of the way. Boys love is escapism, and that's okay. Escapism is valid and can perform important social functions. Not every story has to be gritty and dark and about bad shit. Not every queer story has to be about how we are dying and how we are being killed. We deserve happy sugar-coated stories and lovely coming-of-age stories. A common criticism of boys love is the lack of real queer experiences and struggles.
This is something I agree with, but A, we do still need escapism, shit's already grim enough in the real world, and B, you can still have diverse and representative characters in an escapist story. A fat, disabled, or POC character does not automatically make your story gritty and dark, and you shouldn't need a gritty and dark story to have people like that in your story. In the same vein that queer people deserve and need escapism and representation, so too do members of other groups. One of the most widely applicable and I think damning criticisms of Boyslove is its total lack of diversity. Characters are usually attractive, cis, able-bodied, often wealthy, racially ambiguous, in respectable employment, and to top it off, often don't even identify as gay. Another common argument that usually shows up at the same time is that Boyslove helps normalize queerness to a cishet audience that would otherwise have little or no exposure to queerness. You may remember that argument. I brought it up in the last section. I, however, did not give it the same wall of text I've been giving other arguments, in part because I think it's a very self-explanatory argument that doesn't need much articulating. On the other hand, I think it's bullshit. Here's why. BL isn't made for queer people. It's just not. The market demographic is straight women, anything else is a bonus. And to be honest, even that statement is being kinda generous. You may remember my quote from
สถาพร พาณิชรักษาพงษ์
from earlier in this video, where he states that not only are they targeting heterosexual women, they are actively avoiding targeting a gay audience. A quote, "In BL series produced by GMMTV, the two male leads need to have masculine characteristics. Our target is heterosexual women. They want to see two real men have a sweet romance with each other. They don't want to see any of the boys look too feminine. That's why, when we cast actors, we need to make sure that none of them look effeminate. We are not doing gay series. We also don't need to include so many sex scenes. If we include a lot of sex scenes, we would be attracting a gay audience." There's also another quote from the same paper that I find very funny. This time it's from Yot Karnhurun. You can go ahead and Google voice that one as well, Henri.
ยศ ไกรรุณ
A CEO of Star Hunter Entertainment. The company also produces Boysloves. The quote is as follows. "It is not that we discriminate against LGBT, but from a business perspective, real men actors are a better fit. We are not only doing the series, but we are also star makers. We want to create idols who we can use in other businesses too." What a fucking sentence. We don't discriminate against the queers, we just do it for the money. Regardless of the producer or writer's personal stance, Boyslove isn't written for a queer audience. At all. Representation, especially good representation, is a product of intent and purposeful writing. You don't just stumble your way into that. That shit takes work, especially if you aren't a member of the group you are trying to represent. Boyslove may not be made for queer people, Boyslove may not represent queer people, but it could still help normalize them, right? Wrong. In order to do that, it would need to actually show queer people or relationships at all, and I don't think it is. First of all, gay for you isn't gay, both in the sense that a lot of BL characters either avoid or explicitly deny being gay. Like, the character isn't gay, he told you himself. If a few stories didn't feel the need to explicitly label their characters, that's fine, whatever. A lot of queer people don't like labels either. But the whole genre doing that, and there apparently being instances of characters denying they are gay, it's a bad look. Also, fun fact, my Nazi ex also pulled the shit word for word. "I'm not gay, I'm just gay for you." So I had a real good laugh when I first saw this. So the characters don't consider themselves to be gay or queer. The authors aren't writing them to be queer, and surprise, the relationships depicted aren't queer either. How exactly queerness is defined is a bit of a topic in itself, but the usual consensus is that it's not heterosexual or heteronormative. You know what is heteronormative? BL. Relationships in BL are based on pre-existing gender binaries, the semi and uki. These roles are constructed in exactly the same way as a heterosexual relationship, with one partner being more active, dominant, the penetrator, and usually physically taller and more masculine. This is opposed by the more petite, passive, often younger partner. Even the way that they have sex is in line with heterosexual expectations, with partners usually fucking and missionary, which, from my understanding, do not quote me on this, I am gay and sex-repulsed asexual, so I don't know. But from my understanding, that's how a heterosexual couple would do it. This makes sense. This is made for heterosexual women. Why would a heterosexual woman want anything different than this? This is how they experience and engage in relationships, and like everyone else, they are looking for stories that they can relate to, and what they can relate to is heteronormativity. When BL refuses to portray queerness and queer sex, the only thing it's really portraying is gay men having sex. That's it. And that's another common argument against BL. Its rampant sexualization of gay or queer men and how it reduces them to sexual objects. Firstly, because BL as a genre refuses to portray queer people, all that it's really doing is portraying queer sex. And as I said earlier, it's not even really doing that. There's a reason this genre is often called yaoi. It's literally just porn, with a bit of romance on the side occasionally. Like, I read BL, right? I'm also sex repulsed and an asexual, so I'm obviously not really here for the porn part. But I deadass often struggle to find BLs that aren't literally nothing but sex. BL as a genre reduces gay men to nothing but sexual objects who have sex and sometimes fuck. That's bad. That's worse if you consider the terms in which heterosexual society tends to think about us. When cisheads say they don't want children exposed to sexuality, what they mean is queerness. They don't ever say that about heterosexual marriages or relationships or when heterosexuality is displayed in media. The reason they say that is because they are aware that heterosexual relationships aren't just about maintaining the population, but that there are actual people involved that have some kind of relationship and personalities. They are not aware of that with us. The reason they accuse us of making queerness our whole personality is because they are unwilling to see anything but a queer. They see us exclusively through the lens of sex and sexuality. How fitting that the genre they made depicting us is largely focused on sex, and that the relationships that do exist are modeled after their own. But conflating queerness with sexuality isn't the only historical pitfall that they fall into. They also conflate queerness with pedophilia. One of the classic ways in which persecution of queerness is justified is a supposed danger to the children. Everybody from Hitler, Reagan, and Trump have quoted corrupting influences as a reason to cleanse society of various undesired elements, including queer people. So it makes sense that some queer people are a bit pissy about anything that goes in that direction. Casual correlation of queerness and pedophilia is extremely dangerous and, historically speaking, like the reddest possible flag. If you have interacted with BL at all before, you are aware of where I'm going with this. The rampant pedophilia that is depicted. So, BL isn't made by or for queer people. It doesn't depict an accurate representation of real-life queer people. It doesn't depict queer characters. It doesn't depict queer relationships. The fact queer people relate to or benefit from these stories is accidental at best, and at least a decent segment of the readership of BL is very adamant that the queers have no business here. BL can't help normalize queerness because it has no association with queerness. It can't normalize queerness because it constantly portrays the worst stereotypes about queer people. It can't normalize queerness because it refuses to be queer. It can't normalize queerness because it isn't queer. So, in order to wrap this video up, it would be sensible to give an overview of all of the arguments I've brought up. God knows it's been a long video, and I could have used this while writing. Fun fact, I actually made this at the very end of my writing process. I'm already 10k words deep before I thought of lining up my arguments all nice and tidy like this. So, great. I'll keep it in mind for my next video though. Anyway, the arguments we have seen this far are: reasons women read BL, underdeveloped female characters in traditional media, pure love, aka evades sexism by not having women, removes women to be jealous of or compare itself to, reader can pick if they identify with the top or sub,
aversion to standard romances, the aesthetics, and escapism. Feminist readings for female readership. By escaping the patriarchy, women are acting against it. Rebellion against purity expectations. Separation from own desires. Safe way to interact with sexuality. Shows that gender differences are unimportant, and the idea that fujoshi is an empowering term. Feminist readings against queer ownership. The Western card wasn't made for the gays. BL isn't meant to represent real gay men. Queer analysis of BL is beneficial. Self-identification can help you figure out you're queer or trans. Low barrier way to engage with queerness. BL helps normalize queerness to a wider audience. Omegaverse raises awareness about adoption issues. BL presents an alternative masculinity. BL does not associate the feminine role with negativity, escapism, a world where love beats social norms, gender constructs, financial situations, and social expectations. Queer analysis of BL is harmful. Lack of real queer experience or struggles. Total lack of diversity. BL is not sending a message of inclusivity. It's not made for queer people. Gay for you. Doesn't show queer relationships. Reinforces heteronormativity. Reduces gay men to sexual objects. Assimilationist as fuck. Correlating queerness and pedophilia. Correlating queerness and rape. Rotten in Rotten Girls is due to association with queerness. So, as we can see, a lot more arguments on the queer sections. This is definitely due to my own biases and the fact that I am queer and not a woman. So, great. I've lined up arguments that I thought were counterparts to each other in some way, either addressing the same thing or arguing the opposite of each other. I'm going to show them all on screen now, then kind of go through and explain how I think they relate to each other. If one of them beats the other, or if they complement each other, whether or not I think an argument holds any water will be indicated on screen somehow. Not sure what my editor can do, but he's probably doing it on screen right now, so yeah. I've decided to split the final analysis between queer arguments and feminist arguments. I think that those are the two sides in this debate and the two conflicting frameworks of analyzing BL and its impacts, so I'm going to compare their arguments. Occasionally, I have a point to make that is either a feminist counter-argument to another feminist argument or a queer counter-argument to a queer argument. I've done my best, and failed horribly, to stay neutral during the whole video until this point, but that cheap facade has finally broken, so from this point on, it's just unfiltered my opinion. What I think is a good argument, what I think is a bad argument, and what I think are the implications of what's being said, etc., etc. After I've presented the arguments and gone through which I think are valid and invalid, I will give you my thoughts on what we are supposed to do with this. What is to be done section, if you will. Here's the final argument table. Aversion to standard romances, and BL does not associate the feminine role with negativity. Underdeveloped female characters in traditional media, BL presents an alternative masculinity. Pure love evades sexism by not having woman, BL does still have sexism. Omegaverse raises awareness about adoption issues. Removes women to be jealous of or compare to. Safe way to interact with sexuality. Low barrier way to engage with queerness. Reader can pick if they identify with the top or sub. And self-identification. Can help you figure out if you are queer or trans. Shows that gender differences are unimportant. World where love beats social norms, gender constructs, financial situations, and social expectations. Aesthetics. Let's be honest here, queer people also like the aesthetics. Escapism and escapism. By escaping the patriarchy, women are acting against it. BL helps normalize queerness to a wider audience. BL reinforces heteronormativity. Rebellion against purity expectations and I don't know. Separation from own desires. I'm not sure that's good either. Gay for you. Doesn't show queer relationships. Fujoshi is an empowering term. Rotten in Rotten Girls is due to association with queerness. It's also bad from a feminist point of view. Reduces gay men to sexual objects. The Western card wasn't made for the gays. It's not made for queer people. BL isn't meant to represent real gay men. Total lack of diversity. Lack of real queer experiences or struggles. Queer dismissal comes from misogyny. BL is not sending a message of inclusivity. Female fans are dismissed in general. Assimilationist as fuck. Correlating queerness and pedophilia. Correlating queerness and rape. both relate to consent is also a feminist issue. Starting off with an aversion to standard romances and the fact that BL does not associate the feminine role with negativity. I think both of these make a lot of sense and can coexist. It makes sense that both queer people and straight women would have a desire to get away from standard romances, and that both would feel drawn to media that isn't constructed around heterosexual masculinity. I would like to note that BL does not associate the feminine role with negativity, is specifically about dynamics in the relationship, so the bottom and or sub character. It does not mean that BL is free from sexism. We'll get to that later. These 2 points are directly related to the last 2. A common reason a woman might dislike standard romances is because of how woefully underdeveloped female characters can be, not just in romance. Very often, female characters' whole identity and purpose is looking pretty and literally nothing else. It makes total sense that some people would get sick and fucking tired of that. And I think there's something similar going on with male characters. Male characters very often are just copy-paste, stoic badasses with zero emotions, vulnerability, or character traits. Male characters may be afforded more development than female characters, which, let's be honest here, isn't that much, but they are still incredibly limited. And that's one of the most interesting things that BL does. It constructs an alternative, or multiple alternative, models for masculinity. That's why there are straight male readers of BL. Not many, of course, but they do exist. And I think that these alternative models are really valuable for everyone. In order for straight women to escape the patriarchy, we need to construct relationship models not tainted by the patriarchy. And that requires that the participants of those relationships be different too. Gay men are very often still stuck in the sexist models of maleness, which can very often manifest in sexism directed at women, but can also contribute to internalized homophobia. Straight men are consistently denied vulnerability and any emotion associated with it. Sometimes that ends in physical violence, rape, sexual assault, mass shootings, domestic abuse, etc., but it pretty much always severely damages the interpersonal relationships of the person affected. I think everybody knows some middle-aged man who's fundamentally an okay dude, but was just never taught how to express, communicate, or deal with emotions. The current model of masculinity, constructed through the patriarchy, is harmful to literally everyone, entirely unsustainable, and we need to figure something else out, and BL can help with that. The pure love factor came up a lot when I was looking into why so many women read BL. The idea is that gay relationships or romance are free from sexism because there are no women in it. This creates an idealized equal relationship without heterosexual power dynamics. And again, it makes sense that this would be a factor for straight women. I'd be sick and fucking tired of consuming media where the self-insert for me is usually or often completely denied agency, basic character development, and characterization besides hot. The problem is that BL isn't free from sexism at all. First of all, gay relationships can still be or involve sexism. Gay men are still men, shocking, I know, and like all men are still socialized to base their own value off of devaluing and dehumanizing women. A lot, maybe even most, I would like to think so at least, of gay men reflect on their standing in the patriarchy and try and work on the things they were taught. Not all of them, though. Being a queer man, or a queer person in general, is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for sexism. Secondly, gay relationships can still be based on heteronormativity, and thus sexist. If you've ever seen someone ask a queer couple who the male partner is, that's what's going on there. But also, BL itself is often sexist. I have this lovely quote from Divya Garg in Beyond a Queer Utopia, interrogating misogyny in transnational Boyslove media. Aside from the all too familiar imagination of women as excessively emotional, women in BL shows are also frequently portrayed in extreme dualistic terms, as either unconditionally evil, bad-mouthing and plotting against the male protagonists, or unconditionally good, as an accepting Madonna. BL might not have sexism on the cover, but it's definitely got some shit to work on under the hood. Omegaverse raises awareness about adoption issues. I'm gonna be honest with you, I mostly included this point because I think it's funny. If anyone watching this has any experience with this, let me know. I personally have never heard of this besides in one source, but I also don't read Omegaverse, so you know.
That being said, adoption is either incredibly difficult or straight up impossible for queer folk. In countries that allow it at all, queer people often face added additional scrutiny during the adoption process. Additionally, if one of the queer people has a child from a previous relationship or marriage, it is often incredibly difficult for the other partner to obtain legal recognition or guardianship over the child. So it's not like this isn't a real issue, I've just never heard Omegaverse being brought up in this context. Removes women to be jealous of or compared to. This one is kind of in line with the other arguments about straight women trying to evade or escape sexism. The reason I included this one is because it's about how women are taught to perceive themselves. A man's value is based on his ability to perform masculinity. A woman's value is based on her desirability for men. This desirability is obtained not in a vacuum, but in comparison to other women. Women are taught to constantly compare themselves to other women, including in the media they consume. This naturally also extends to romance. It makes sense that you would like a break from that and instead consume media with nobody to compare yourself to. Again, please keep in mind, Boyslove is often very incredibly heteronormative. The reason this still works is because the characters don't look like women and aren't referred to or seen as women. Safe way to interact with sexuality, low barrier way to engage with queerness. BL is often not taken very seriously. I talked about that earlier, but anything teenage girls like is automatically a joke for most people. However, I think that might be for its benefit in this case. For a lot of people, Boyslove is a safe way to interact with sexuality, and I think it stands to reason that it would be one of the first ways of doing that for a lot of people. For women, it's great at doing that because it's centered around straight female desire and expectations. It's literally made for them, unlike pretty much anything else. In addition to that, it can function as a way to express sexuality. I mentioned this towards the beginning of the video, but female desire and sexuality is heavily sanctioned in our society. Women are objects to be wanted, not to want. And like everything else with the patriarchy, this is enforced by various means and imposed upon people from a very young age. So it makes sense that for some people, having an outlet to express desire in a way that's detached from themselves, or femininity, would be a good thing. Much like female desire or sexuality is suppressed, queerness is often a heavily stigmatized topic. There are significant barriers to figuring out you are queer and coming out as queer. That's why the concept of the closet exists in the first place. And especially for people starting out, finding a way to safely engage with the topic and your own potential queerness can be really tough. Kind of paradoxically, because BL is made for straight women, it can be more easily consumed than queer media. Queer media comes with a stigma. It outs you as at least interested in queerness. But if you're reading the same shit as a lot of other girls are reading, if you're reading silly little mangas that nobody cares about, people don't. They don't care. And depending on where you are, it can give you enough plausible deniability to be able to engage with queerness for the first time. Readers can pick if they identify with the top or sub and self-identification. One of the advantages for readers of BL is that you can pick the character you identify with. For queer people, this can be an extension of their lived experience and an examination of how to interact with relationships. Everybody needs and wants representation, and BL can be a place to get that. A large reason why I enjoy BL is because the characters have fundamental similarities to me. It's easy to see myself in the position of one of the characters, and so I live out my gay little fantasies by reading BL. For straight women reading BL, the reasons can often overlap, but as far as I've been able to tell, are less about direct self-identification and representation. What they do get is the ability to pick between identifying with the top, bottom, or dom sub. Heteronormativity kind of prescribes being a sub for women. It keeps coming up, but the patriarchy has very specific gender roles, and those extend to having sex, obviously. Now, the thing that conservatives refuse to admit is that reality isn't binary and people aren't binary. Plenty of women like to dom, and they sure aren't getting anything that serves that niche with heterosexual romance. Can help you figure out your queer/trans. This lines up with the self-identification and low barrier of entry points. It makes sense that a genre that's often read by women, and specifically teenagers, that also places you in the perspective of a man would have a lot of people realizing they are trans because of it. Now, I got this point from a friend of mine, and I've seen it floating around on forums a few times. I didn't see any studies about this, and I have zero idea how common this is. But it's definitely a thing. I just can't tell you how much of a thing, or how often, how frequent it is. Shows that gender differences are unimportant, a world where love beats social norms, gender constructs, financial situations, and social expectations. This is kind of the same point for both sides. It's basically that BL is portraying a better world. For women, it's a world where gender differences aren't the determining factor in a relationship, and for queer people, it's a world where we are able to enter into relationships. Love beating social norms, gender constructs, and financial situations is probably like 95% of all romance, and a decent chunk of stories in general. Humans love a good love story, especially about overcoming adversity. It's just kind of our thing. Escapism. Basically the last point, I'm just including this because I want to point out that Boyslove and similar media is often criticized for being entirely detached from lived queer experiences. And I kind of disagree with that, because not all media can or should be about how horrible the world makes it to be queer. We deserve to have happy, sugar-coated coming-of-age stories, and we deserve to see people like ourselves that are happy. We deserve to have happy endings both in real life and in fiction. And that's the value of escapism. It paints an alternative world, a world that could be different. In doing so, it calls upon us to act to move our world closer to the ideal we imagine. Now, while I don't think that all queer media has to be dark and gritty, I do think that all queer media has to be, well, queer. And BL isn't. I talked about that in the last section. It's not written by, for, or about queer people. It has zero representation. It's white, attractive, respectable twinks as far as the eye can see. And that's a huge issue. But the escapism itself isn't. And I think that often when people are trying to express their discomfort with the representation issues, they end up criticizing escapism instead of the actual problem. Aesthetics. Let's be honest, queer people also like the aesthetics. I don't really think I need to explain this one. People like the art style. I do too. It's a major draw for me. Now, I'm going to be honest with you here. I couldn't tell you why people like the older Boyslove style with the incredibly fucked up anatomy. This isn't actually part of the point that I want to make for this section, but I didn't know where else to bring this up. Basically, in heterosexual romance, there's very strong focus on the female partner because that stuff is made for men. What that means in manga is that the female characters are incredibly detailed, whereas the male characters are bland and boring, because they're not supposed to be the focus. That doesn't work for straight female readers, though, because they're more focused on the male characters. So one of the reasons that straight women read BL is because the male characters are actually visually interesting to look at. By escaping the patriarchy, women are acting against it, and Boyslove helps normalize queerness to a wider audience. Boyslove reinforces heteronormativity. One common idea amongst feminist opinions on BL is that by reading BL, women are acting against the patriarchy. I encountered the idea really early in my research for this video, and it's been bothering me ever since. However, I was never able to articulate why it bothers me so much. Because the media we consume is inherently political, and consuming subversive media is itself a deeply political and important act. Also, escapism is inherently political, and that's good. Mentioned it earlier, bringing it up here again. So I think that media consumption is inherently political, and that consuming subversive media is in itself a political action. Then why don't I think women reading BL is a subversive political action? Because Boyslove is heteronormative as fuck. Trying to subvert the patriarchy by reading BL is like trying to subvert the idea that family determines who you are by reading Harry Potter. It's just not fucking possible. BL is a direct reproduction of heteronormativity. It's heteronormative relationship dynamics, heteronormative characters, heteronormative sex. That's it. It's a heterosexual relationship with two men. The genre literally has gender roles. What part of the patriarchy is this supposed to be subverting? The idea of gender-based relationship dynamics? The power imbalance in relationships? Equating being a bottom or sub with femininity? or having a concept of consent. The only thing that BL does that's even close to subversive is showing that the feminine partner can enjoy sex too. The fact that there is a feminine partner at all makes this not subversive. There are feminist arguments for Boyslove. I'm not a total Boyslove hater, but like, what the fuck? I'll get back to that at the end of this video, like specifically this, but Boyslove is literally just heteronormativity that's been dipped in lavender. That's also why I don't think BL normalizes queerness to a wider audience. The idea shows up a lot, both among queer people and straight women that read BL, and it's bullshit. Like I said earlier, BL is not queer. It doesn't want to be queer. It actively rejects the possibility of being queer. How then is it supposed to normalize queerness? Rebellion against purity expectations and I don't know. I'm kind of torn on this argument. On one hand, yeah, it does do that. Pretty much any expression of desire, sexuality, or attraction is a rebellion against purity culture, and so BL is too. Boyslove can also function as a low barrier way for women and queers to engage with sexuality, which is great. As I've said before, though, BL is just heteronormativity with a pink bow. You can't subvert the patriarchy by reproducing it, and you sure ain't gonna lose the purity culture that way either. Separation from own desires, and I'm not sure that's good either. Related to that, if women read BL to deflect their own sexuality and associated shame away from themselves onto queer men, that isn't really rebelling against purity culture so much as it is coping, you know? Neither of these points are like incredibly offensive. They don't piss me off as much as the others do, but I don't really agree with them either, and I don't really think that they are presenting a good phenomena. If some women read BL to get away from purity culture, I think that's fine. Good for them. But framing that as rebelling against it, I don't know. No. Now, I'm certain that a decent amount of people who read BL might disagree with me here, and I also think that there's probably tons of BL that does actively go against purity culture expectations. But I don't feel that it's fair to say that for the whole genre. The vibe that I get from BL is more deflecting shame away from yourself and less dismantling harmful structures or ideas. Similar to that with the separation from your own desires. I certainly see how that's a factor in why people read BL, but I'm not going to come out here and say that that's good. Armchair psychology here, but fundamentally, suppressing your own desires usually isn't that great of an idea. Like, as a rule of thumb, maybe don't do that. Like, Freud got a lot of shit wrong, but even as the first, he was onto something with suppressions of desires is not that great. Not to get sidetracked here, but I feel like Freud would have a field day with this topic. Sexuality and desire and lust and female behavior that seems weird at first glance was kind of his whole deal. Anyway, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know any of the people doing that. This doesn't affect me, and I don't think it's relevant politically speaking, but yay, suppressing emotions is a bit weird. Gay for you. I explained this one earlier. This is homophobic. It's a bad look for an entire genre built around gay men refusing to even admit that they are portraying gayness. Not cool. Doesn't show queer relationships. Like I also said earlier, it doesn't portray queer people or queer relationships, which is kind of a fundamental flaw for a genre that's supposed to be a gay romance genre, you know? Fujoshi is an empowering term. Rotten and rotten girls is due to association with queerness, and it's also bad from a feminist point of view. The term Fujoshi is basically the center of this whole debate. Who is or isn't a Fujoshi? Is being a Fujoshi good or bad? And what makes it good or bad? Lots of different takes from lots of different people on all of those questions. Feminists, in quotes, the people who are called and refer to themselves as Fujoshi, claim that it's a good thing. There are a few different reasons often given for why they think it's good. One such reason is articulated in this quote from Christy Kawano. Beyond the pages even, by labeling themselves Fujoshi, BL fans prevent others from sticking a different label on them. With this subversive term, they voluntarily cut themselves off from the demands of the world of men, with rotten making it clear that they are no longer for male consumption. There's also the argument that the term stems from misogynistic Japanese men calling female BL fans rotten for not having stereotypical feminine interests and indulging in queer sexual narratives, and then the woman reclaiming this term, which allows them to craft an identity that sets them apart from others. I don't agree with any of that. I think that this quote from Alina Joanne Ito in an article for the Tokyo Weekender says it best. The Fujoshi calls herself rotten because of her enjoyment of homoerotic relationships, suggesting that there is something inherently wrong with homosexuality, sexual desire, or both. The act of calling oneself a Fujoshi while protecting oneself from criticism is deflecting the shame to homoeroticism and female desire. Just to be clear, in case this hasn't become obvious, the Fujoshi debate is the center of the larger BL discourse, and the center of the Fujoshi debate is about what the rotten in Rotten Girls is referring to. Queer and feminist critics of Boyslove argue that the rotten is due to association with queerness and or feminine sexuality. Fujoshi, or feminists, either argue that it's due to divergence from traditional femininity or displaying female or queer sexuality, and that reclaiming the term brings some kind of benefit to women. But like, if it were just about divergence from traditional femininity, it would be a slur for butches, or women in the trades, or women who wear pants. But it isn't. If this were about displays of female sexuality, it would be a slur for women who read erotica, in general, not specifically homo. Or it would be a slur for women who are sexually promiscuous, but it isn't. The only rotten thing it could be about is queerness. The fact that it is beneficial to women in some form does not change that it is a slur about queer people. Technically, it's not a slur about queer people. It's more a term that derives its derogatoriness from association with queer people, but that's still bad. So, slurs can be reclaimed by the group affected by them. I can say faggot, I can say queer because I am both of those things. I cannot say the N-word because I'm not black. I have no say in who gets to say the N-word, and whether or not saying the N-word has any kind of benefit to me is incredibly irrelevant, because I'm not black and it's not my slur to reclaim. Now, there are a lot of queer female readers of Boyslove. This is often forgotten by both sides. Queer women also have the agency to reclaim slurs. However, my problem with the word Fujoshi is less so with the actual word and more with the attitude surrounding it. Do you know what people who defend the usage of the word Fujoshi say? It lets the women who read BL craft an identity of their own. It lets the women who read BL cut themselves off from the world of men. I completely agree that queer people, and specifically also queer women, can reclaim terms and slurs about us. But the usage of this word and the debate around it isn't about queer people. It's about women, which is a completely separate group that does not necessarily intersect with queer people, and that does not have the right to reclaim slurs about other oppressed groups, and that should not be the focus of a debate around a word that is targeted at a completely different group. The fact this debate, specifically about the word Fujoshi, is about women is the problem. People defending the word Fujoshi say it's good for women, then they pause for a second, put down a comma, give it a moment, and then they go, also the gays. If this were about reclaiming the slur, it would be about queer people and nothing else. That word is about queer people. Its ire is directed at queer people. The fact it may be beneficial to women is woefully irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Also, I would like to point out that gay men and queer men do also have a right to decide what terms are okay in reference to them. A queer person that isn't trans does not automatically get to decide when the word tranny is in order, because that word isn't about them. Queer men have the right to say that they are not comfortable with a term that calls them and their relationships rotten, even if a queer woman would be okay with it. Also, as an addendum, I would like to point out that the term Fujoshi is also bad from a feminist point of view. For starters, homophobia, transphobia, aphobia, biphobia, panphobia, etc., maintain the patriarchy. The foundation of queerphobia and sexism are both gender essentialism. Queerphobia is inherently anti-feminist, as anti-feminism is inherently a queer issue. These struggles are related. But also, in a much less abstract sense, deflecting the shame of female sexuality onto queer people does nothing to solve the fundamental issue of women being denied sexuality. If anything, it makes it worse, because it's an agreement that female desire is so repugnant that it needs to be hidden away with the queers. I know I just spent a whole paragraph going on about how this isn't about women, but I would also like to make it clear that there are multitudes to how this is kinda shitty. Reduces gay men to sexual objects. This is basically an extension of the idea that BL isn't queer media. BL doesn't depict queer characters, it doesn't depict queer relationships, all it depicts is queer sex, and to be honest, you could argue it doesn't even really do that. By denying the characters the ability to be anything but gay men having sex, it inherently reduces gay men to sexual objects who don't have a personality, don't have an identity, whose only purpose it is to fuck for the enjoyment of others. The Western card. I brought the Western card up very briefly earlier in the video. The argument is basically that either Western criticisms of BL are irrelevant because BL is coming from a completely different cultural context, and or that criticisms of BL are an exclusively Western phenomena. Now, I call this argument the Western card, but it actually shows up in a few different ways. The argument itself is pretty much always the same, but the words used vary. Sometimes it's Western, sometimes it's Anglo, sometimes international, sometimes just American. Sometimes they do also combine the words, for example, Western English speakers. These words are used as complete synonyms, which is just bullshit on a linguistic level. The international is referring to non-Japanese fans, but not all international fans are in Western countries, not all Western countries are Anglo, and not all Anglo countries are American. Also, the words being combined usually just opens up a whole new level of stupid. For example, Western English speakers. For starters, just because someone online is speaking in English does not mean that they are from a Western country. Like it or not, English is the lingua franca at the moment. It's the dominant language in a cultural and economic sense. It's the language almost everyone learns in school. It makes sense for people from different countries to speak to each other in English because that's the language almost everyone with internet access can speak. Assuming someone is from a Western country because they can speak English is insane, and discounting opinions just because they speak English is ludicrous. And even if someone is an international English-speaking fan from a Western English-speaking country, that doesn't invalidate their opinion. That's not how literary criticism works. You don't only get to have an opinion on something if you are from the exact culture it originates from. Like, I'm going to make an assumption here, but I'd guess that plenty of Japanese people also have opinions on Western media. If a Chinese person has an opinion about All Quiet on the Western Front, that's fucking fine. If a Brazilian person has an opinion on Spider-Man, that's okay. The fact that they are from Brazil or China does not automatically invalidate their opinion. It might change how they interpret certain events or character choices, and maybe that interpretation would diverge from someone from New York or Germany, but that's it, and that's fine. Different cultures are different and interpret stuff, including media, differently. I'm kind of confused why I even have to say that. Also, there are Japanese critiques of Boyslove. There have been Japanese critiques of Boyslove since Boyslove has been a thing, long before any of those dirty English-speaking international fans in Western countries could poison the minds of Japanese gay men or something. The most prominent example I could find is from a paper. I'm calling it a paper. I'm not really sure what the definitions are, and I don't want to be rude, is on the response or lack thereof of Japanese fans to criticism that yaoi is anti-gay discrimination by Akiko Hori. The paper itself is from 2013. However, it discusses the yaoi dispute that occurred in 1992. The yaoi dispute occurred when a gay man wrote a feminist sign criticizing yaoi as discriminatory towards gay men. Then a female fan of BL responded, and that kicked off the discussion. I'm not really going to get into what they said, but if it's of interest to you, you should go read it. It's free online, and I have it linked in the sources. However, I would like to point out that some of the points I brought up in this very video are basically things that were brought up in that original discussion 30 years ago. Stuff like defending BL by saying it's not meant to represent real gay men, or critiquing it by saying that it completely ignores gay reality. Some things just stick around. Back to the point though. Non-Japanese people can have opinions about Boyslove. Cross-cultural media analysis exists. And also there is Japanese criticism. I don't speak a single word of Japanese, so I genuinely haven't the slightest idea what it's like. But I'd be willing to bet that if you ask the right people in Japan, they could also tell you about Japanese BL debates. To kind of flip the board, I'd even dare say the reason people making this argument think that there isn't a debate in Japan about this is because they also don't speak Japanese, because they're also international fans. Wasn't made for the gays, it's not made for queer people. The idea that BL isn't made for the gays comes up a lot. Interestingly, I've only ever seen it with people who consider queer people and women to be two entirely separate groups. The reason I think that they think that is because I've seen a few people use the words men, gay, and queer completely interchangeably, which they very much are not. Now, I would also like to note that there are feminists who argue that BL is good for women, including queer women. The fujoshi.info website I found, which is the single largest fujoshi source I've been able to find, is very, very vocal about queer people also liking BL and benefiting from BL. But I've also seen individuals that seem to think of women and queer people as like polar opposites. Either way, I agree with them. BL isn't made for queer people, it just fucking isn't. We aren't the target demographic, we aren't the people being thought of when it's written or marketed for. It's not about queer people, and a very vocal subset of the majority reader base is insistent that they do not want us to be around. I just don't think that that's a defense for the genre. If anything, that's a further argument against it. I made a genre about an oppressed minority for the enjoyment of a much larger section of the population, and I'm actively ignoring the opinions and criticisms of said minority while using exactly that minority to make tons of money is not a win. It just isn't. BL isn't made for queer people. But if I were a straight reader, I would be ashamed about that, not bragging about it. BL isn't made to represent real gay men. A total lack of diversity and a lack of queer experiences or struggles. Again, a very popular argument to defend BL is the idea that it wasn't made to represent real gay men, which lines up nicely with the last one. And it's the same basic response. BL isn't made to represent real gay men, and it doesn't. It very successfully does not do that. BL as a genre completely avoids any meaningful discussions of queerness or being gay. It skillfully evades having to say anything interesting or relevant. BL as a genre excels at avoiding depicting the endless diversity and beauty of being queer. Not a single word is wasted on discussions of how freeing non-heterosexist relationships can be. BL chooses time and time again to not try and expand its audience's horizons. I think you can hear how bad that sounds. And I think it's fair if queer people criticize the genre, even if it's true that it wasn't meant to represent them. Queer dismissal comes from misogyny. So this may come as a surprise due to how negative I've been, but I actually completely agree with this. As I said earlier, gay men are still men and are thus still indoctrinated into the patriarchy. As such, they are still required to perform work to unlearn the things that they have been taught, like everyone else. However, if that doesn't happen, they can still very much be able to act or think in a sexist manner. Gay men especially can often hide their sexism behind being gay or queer, and the idea that there's a certain knee-jerk reaction to having women in gay spaces makes total sense to me. Now, the person making this argument initially didn't say this, but I'm going to go ahead and clarify it anyway. I don't think that all criticisms of BL are coming from misogyny, obviously. I agree that it's a factor in some people's reactions and that it's fuel on the fire, but I also think that there are valid things to criticize and discuss about BL. You know, obviously, that's what I've been doing for like 2 hours at this point. BL is not sending a message of inclusivity. So this is kind of an extension of the BL has a total lack of any diversity and any actual queer relationships. However, I chose to include this because I want to point out that BL has a certain representative function to non-queer people. There's already a woefully small amount of anything remotely queer, but the stuff that does exist, as far as I'm aware, usually isn't very well known outside of queer circles. BL is a very large genre by queer standards. It's large enough that a decent amount of non-queer people are aware of it. Ignoring all the other issues BL has in its current state, BL is showing a very distorted view of queerness. The average queer in BL is a white, cis, able-bodied twink that's attractive. The message that BL is sending is that acceptable queerness is white, cis, able-bodied, attractive, and respectable. So what about young queers or people who are just starting to figure out they are queer? What is someone who isn't white or able-bodied or cis or a twink or attractive going to think when they see BL's version of queerness? Are they going to think this is a community for them? Are they going to see enough people like them that they will feel accepted? Would you feel welcome in a community whose poster characters and media very often have nothing in common with you? Female fans are dismissed in general. Again, close parallels to a previous point, this time it's the queer criticisms come from misogyny. Female fans aren't taken serious anywhere. That especially includes erotica. This of course also applies to discourse around Boyslove and general attitudes towards it. I would also specifically like to point out that this factor is at play both with how queer people might be responding to BL, but also with how third parties might interact with BL and its readers. This isn't really an argument, more of a thought that I'm throwing out for discussion, if anyone has any thoughts about it. I could imagine that the reason BL has been able to get away with horrible shit for so long is exactly because no one takes it serious. And, you know, the reason nobody takes it serious is because it's a female genre and erotica. Like, if a serious, heavy quotes, author or genre had this much blatant rape and pedophilia in there, I think there'd be more of a reckoning. Obviously, serious authors and genres also have issues galore, and those issues very often, or maybe even usually, aren't really dealt with. Off the top of my head, so this isn't saying particularly much, but the only other cases I can think of a genre or book being this bad about consent is that one, the Lida book, which I've not read, do not really know anything about, but I've heard stuff, and the kind of general genre of dark fantasy, which I also don't read. Anyway, that's just an idea I'm throwing out there, so grain of salt. Correlating queerness and pedophilia/rape and consent is also a feminist issue. BL as a genre refuses to portray queer people. All it's really doing is portraying queer sex, and as I've said multiple times, it's not even really doing that. There's a reason this genre is often called yaoi. It's literally just porn with a bit of romance on the side. Like, I read BL, right? But I'm also a sex-repulsed asexual, so I'm obviously not here for the porn part. But I deadass often struggle to find BLs that are anything but sex. I've been stuck in a wholesome slice of life route for like half a year now. BL as a genre reduces gay men to nothing but sexual objects who have sex and sometimes fuck. That's already bad enough. That's worse if you consider the terms in which heterosexual society tends to think about us. When cisheads say they don't want children exposed to sexuality, what they mean is queerness. Nobody ever has an issue with a kid being at a heterosexual marriage or heterosexual relationships being depicted in media. The reason they say that is because they are aware that heterosexual relationships aren't just about maintaining the population, but that there are actually people involved that have some kind of relationship and personalities. They are not aware of that with us. The reason they accuse us of making queerness our whole personality is because they are unwilling to see anything but a queer. They see us exclusively through the lens of sex and sexuality. How fitting that the genre they made depicting us is largely focused on sex, and that the relationships that do exist are modeled after their own. But conflating queerness with sexuality isn't the only historical pitfall that they fall into. They also conflate queerness with pedophilia. One of the classic ways in which persecution of queerness is justified is a supposed danger to the children. Everybody from Hitler, Reagan, and Trump have quoted corrupting influences as a reason to cleanse society of various undesired elements, including queer people. Casual correlation of queerness and pedophilia is extremely dangerous and, historically speaking, like the reddest possible flag. If you have interacted with BL before, you are probably aware where I'm going with this. The rampant pedophilia that is depicted. I'm frankly not even sure what I'm supposed to say here. I don't know how to argue for pedophilia bad, but with how widespread this shit is in this genre, I kind of feel like I have to. And I don't know why people read this. I don't understand what people are getting from this. This is a related point to the whole rapey aspects of BL that I brought up in the feminist part. Why the fuck is this so popular? And like, there's a place for stories about rape and sexual abuse and pedophilia, but like for stories that discuss the implications of or how it affects the survivors or like something, not portraying it as a lovely love story filled with love. And if we put this into the context that this genre depicts a minority, is not written by said minority, and mainly consumed by the dominant majority, and that this genre is supposed to have an educating effect on the majority, I'm getting a really icky feeling by now. I think this might have been cut at some point from the earlier versions of the script, but I wanted to bring it up. Rape is also a feminist topic. The way BL handles rape is hugely problematic from a feminist point of view. The fact it's men getting raped doesn't change that. The fact it's gay men getting raped makes it worse because now it's a social majority fulfilling rape fantasies against a minority. The fact that these rape fantasies are perpetuated by often, but not always, straight women who are themselves an oppressed group doesn't change that. And what's worse, it's defended too. This is not a new criticism. I'm not the first person to bring this up, and it just gets hand waved away. The next quote is from Christy Kawano, a person I have cited multiple times in this video. A subgenre of BL that depicts sexual relationships between older men and underage boys is commonly frowned upon, and gay rights activists have criticized Boyslove for its inaccurate portrayal of homosexual men. Writers and fans, however, back up the genre by saying that the characters are not meant to represent real gay men anyway, and that separation or escape from reality is central to fans' attraction to BL. Genuinely, what the fuck? I don't even know where to start with this. First of all, we're back on our, well, women like it bullshit, but also, girl, the implications? And just like, what in general? Like, I'm pretty sure I discussed some of this already, and if I haven't, I do in the end segment. But like, this is seriously one of the worst quotes that I found in the entire research process for this video. I am genuinely unable to articulate how uniquely shit this take is. Like, the other people saying, well, women like it, are also full of shit, but they aren't lining that up with depictions of fucking pedophilia. And as a side note here, but I think it's kind of interesting that they're having their rape and pedophilia fantasies with us. Like, there is a much larger hetero romance market. Why do they feel the need to do this shit on our side of the fence? Like, maybe I'm just not aware of cishet romance novels. I'm definitely not aware of cishet romance novels. The only one I can name is 50 Shades of Grey, and from what I've heard, that's also really bad in terms of consent. But like, assuming they are aware that these things, rape and pedophilia, are bad, and I am doing that, I am assuming that they know it's bad, why do they feel comfortable taking this to us? Why does a cishet woman feel comfortable with a gay teen getting raped when she presumably wouldn't feel comfortable with depictions of an underage girl being assaulted? Assimilationist as fuck. So BL is not just a queer text, it is inherently incapable of normalizing queerness to a wider audience, and it's spreading extremely harmful stereotypes about queer people and gay men. But that's not all of it. The message it's sending to the queer people who read it is also bad. The closest thing BL as a genre has to a political message is gay people are just like you. Not actual gay people, of course, a sanitized, whitewashed, and conventionally attractive and respectable version of gay people whose primary purpose it is to appeal to straight women. And that's bad. The beginning of the modern gay rights movement was the Stonewall riots around the Stonewall in New York in 1969. Before Stonewall, the riots, and the ensuing decades of struggle, there were already gay rights movements and various organizations. The gay rights movement before Stonewall was largely, as far as I'm aware, assimilationist, trying to appease to the heterosexual majority and gain rights by proving that we are just like them and that they don't have to be scared and that we are respectable. And that didn't work. There were decades, centuries of queer persecution before Stonewall. The reason any queer person watching this, or that you know, has basic human rights is because a brick was thrown at a cop, because queer people violently resisted and violently defended ourselves and our community. The assimilationists before Stonewall were trying to be respectable. They were begging for basic rights by trying to convince the majority that we were just like them. The reason Stonewall was different was exactly because they didn't care about what the majority thought. The reason Stonewall was different was because it didn't have to try to buy respectability by abandoning large portions of the community, like POC or disabled people or sex workers or anyone not respectable enough. The idea of respectability that BL is promoting is dangerous because it encourages passivity and dependence on people who don't care about us. Because even if it somehow did work, which it's not gonna, we would be forced to abandon the majority of our community to maintain that respectability. What we need is queer liberation, not assimilation. What we need is an understanding of the fact that our struggle is deeply connected to others. Our liberation is directly tied to the freedoms of POC, women, sex workers, people with disabilities, workers in the global south, workers in low-paying jobs, etc., etc., etc. The reason I keep bringing up how most things are bad from a queer and feminist perspective is because it's instrumental to understanding how these things are fundamentally aligned. The fact that so many of the issues with BL are just hand-waved away by slapping a feminism sticker onto it is hugely problematic. The fact that I had to pit the feminist and queer argument against each other is itself a problem.
I would like to state for the record that we've been filming for like 10 hours, and if my editor can work this into the video, I would like that to be known. So if I seem a bit tired for the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes of the video, that's why. It's like in the middle of the fucking night, and it's like an hour past my bedtime, so. I started writing this video because I knew I had some kind of feeling and felt some kind of way about Boyslove and about how so many straight women read Boyslove. But I wasn't able to articulate that feeling, so I decided to make a video out of that. Because nothing forces you to do your best with research and argumentation like the possibility of having unlimited random people descend upon you. The way I went about researching this video was by basically just reading as many comments and forums and papers and studies as I could find. I would read something, and then when someone said, I read BL because I like the art style, I'd make a note. And when someone said women read BL because they want to skip the patriarchy, I'd make another note. Repeat that like 200 times. And my decision to include things in the video, and there is a decision there, I selected things I thought were interesting and that I thought were relevant, and that can be fundamentally different than what someone else might find interesting or relevant, was based on how often I saw an argument, and if I saw something really interesting, I tried my best to include that as well. The Omegaverse argument, for example. And then I tried to make some kind of coherent explanation that explains the different things I'm seeing, how different arguments could sit together in an ideological framework, and how different ideological frameworks would come to different conclusions, how people on different frameworks might interpret something someone on a different framework said, etc. The opposite of what I'm trying to make here is another women reading BL is bad video. Like, I'm trying to understand my own position and other people's, how they got there, what they think, and why they think it. And the way I'm trying to do that is by gathering up as many arguments from as many people as possible in order to create as unbiased a foundation for my opinion as possible. Because there's something going on here, but just calling it fetishization doesn't feel right to me. Now, I'm not sure what the technical term is for this, but it's something I've observed in general. When people feel some kind of way about something, but don't have the words to accurately articulate why they feel that way, they just kind of grab the nearest word they can find and run with it. An example for this is one time in school we were discussing a literary figure that was clearly displaying some kind of abnormal or irregular psychological behavior, and someone just threw out, "Oh, I think he's a psychopath." Now, being a psychopath is a very specific medical term. It has clear symptoms and behavioral criteria. The character being discussed was very clearly not a psychopath, but that's also not what the person calling him that meant. Not really. What they were trying to say was, this person is displaying behavior that I think is weird and due to some kind of mental illness. They just didn't know how to say that. The problem with doing this is that words do actually have meaning, and that a band-aid solution can actually end up doing more harm than good because it muddies the waters even more and makes further articulation even more difficult. And that's what I think is going on with the word fetishization in the context of Boyslove. You may have noticed I've basically entirely avoided using that word in this entire video, except maybe the thumbnail and the title because it's incredibly clickbaity.
I wasn't able to find a definition of fetishization that I felt fit in this situation, and I also don't feel like it's an accurate description of the problem. I think that the usage of the word fetishization is an attempt from queer folk to articulate a perceived underlying issue. And while I was researching my video, I found more and more arguments that I thought were horrible. Stuff that made my skin crawl and that pissed me off so bad I had to stop working on the entire video for a whole day. From people who either called themselves Fujoshi or were called Fujoshi. And so that was a real issue for me, because I made this video to try and understand my own feelings about straight women reading BL and figure out why women read BL at all. I don't want to create an inflammatory drama video that just stirs the same pot one more time. But I also want to be honest and actually talk about the things I am seeing, feeling, and thinking. But what if what I'm seeing is inflammatory as fuck? Like, I saw 2 to 3 comments of people saying they like BL because of their reverse rape fantasies. The fact men are getting raped is a bonus for them. I saw a paper say that incest is queer. Rape is built into the genre, and that's just hand waved away repeatedly. And I don't know how to talk about that in a neutral way. I don't know how to talk about that without it being more inflammatory than fucking napalm. I don't know how to talk about this in a way that tries to understand why people are doing the things they're doing and saying the things they're saying, even if I disagree with them. But at the same time, I can't not talk about this. This video is being made to figure out my feelings about BL, and I feel disgusted. If I'm making a video about this charged topic, I can't just ignore the most charged part. Where there is conflict, there is development, and the most interesting and most important parts are always the hardest to talk about. As a queer person, I have to talk about this because a lot of this is horrible. I completely understand why so many queer people dislike BL and why so many queer men feel uncomfortable with the genre. From a feminist perspective, this is also horrible. This is the feminism we want to represent. This is the feminism that's supposed to help women escape the patriarchy. This is what we want young kids who are trying to figure shit out to read. Fucking rape fantasies and the worst homophobic stereotypes. Just to be clear, this isn't me condemning all media that depicts rape or queerphobia or sexism or other bad things. Media has a right and an obligation to reflect reality, and those things are part of our reality. What I want is something to be done with those topics. I want my media to talk about how these things happen, or the effects they have on people, or something. A book or movie or painting that depicts rape but says something is fine. Good, actually, if it helps widen our understanding of the topic. A BL that has a character be raped and act like that's because of overwhelming love isn't saying anything. It's not widening our understanding of the topic. It's just contributing to the spread of a very real and harmful way people do actually think about rape and sexual assault. Anyway, how do I talk about this? Because I want to do right by myself and other queer people, and that means I gotta talk about the bad stuff. But at the same time, I also want to do right by the women who read BL, and that means I gotta listen to them and why they read BL and how they feel about stuff. But I also need to differentiate between the people who are just reading gay romance and the people defending rape fantasies, among other things. To not do that would implicate all female readers of BL, and that's the exact type of bullshit I'm trying to avoid. And if possible, I'd also like to give a coherent explanation for what's happening here and a workable conclusion that isn't just everything sucks, nothing we can do about it. As I explained at the start of this video, for this video I am differentiating between feminists, in quotes, and feminists, no quotes. Now, one of these groups, feminists without quotes, I mostly agree with. That's the argument about why women read BL. The people I disagree with, feminists with quotes, are largely preoccupied with arguing why this isn't a queer genre. That's where all the horrible arguments usually are coming from. These people are the ones often or usually referred to as Fujoshis. So should I call them Fujoshi? Well, no, because that's not what that word means. It's just a female reader of Boyslove. And that word is very loaded and very clickbaity, so if I use it, I can kiss my no drama rule goodbye. But what do I call them? Well, they certainly think of themselves as feminists. They claim to argue with feminist theory, but at the same time, I can't call defending rape porn feminist, can I? But if I don't call them feminists, I'm also undermining their argument because the fact that they think they are feminists is central to their argument. If I take that away, there is no argument to talk about. So what I settled on was a feminist in quotes and feminist no quotes debacle. I'm gonna be honest with you, I fucking hate it. I'm still kind of calling rape fantasies feminist. I'm linguistically undermining the argument before I can even present it, and now I gotta pit queerness and feminism against each other. I hate it. It's horrible. It's a travesty. So everything sucks, BL has issues, nobody can express shit, and everyone's mad at each other and at me. What do we do? Well, if we take a look at the arguments I gathered up, you will notice that most of these are green, indicating that I agree with them, or think that they have merit. Not only are most of them green, pretty much all of the opposing or matching arguments are green too. Interesting. Fundamentally, most of the arguments I managed to pick out on both sides are things that I more or less agree with. So what's the problem here? What's the core issue? What's the thing that everyone disagrees about? I'm going to hit you with 2 quotes. One of them is really long, the longest quote in the video, to kind of illustrate the surrounding terrain, ease you into it, let you see if you can get what I'm trying to say with it. The second one is intensely short and wonderfully to the point, and it's what I've been building up to the whole time. Let's start with the long one.
The fan who first responded pointed out that gender inequality was still pervasive in Japanese society, and that using a male-male relationship in their fiction allowed female fans to write stories that would be impossible to write and enjoy if they featured a male-female relationship. She explained that enjoying fantastical yaoi stories was a very important part of female fans' lives, and that such stories gave them comfort in a way that male-female romances never could. Yaoi novelist Kaoru Kurimoto expressed a similar opinion. Writing under an alias, Kurimoto said that women are constantly classified based on how they look, how they fulfill female-gendered functions, how they perform as home maintenance machines, how much added value they're perceived to have, or how fresh they are, and speculated that these women imagine yaoi to be a place where the gaze of men and societies doesn't exist, and where they themselves, always the object of that gaze, don't exist either. Of particular interest is a contribution of another woman in the debate. She had been a yaoi fan at one point, but had stopped reading yaoi works by the time the dispute erupted. This former fan emphasized that she felt it was shameful that she had once used gay men as fuel for her own fantasies. She had been both a yaoi fan and an okage, fag hag, but as she got to know gay people, she became aware of her own discriminatory attitude towards them and stopped reading yaoi works as a result. The yaoi fan, who had argued that yaoi is purely fantasy, replied that she couldn't just let go of yaoi altogether, even if it's discriminatory. And she explained that yaoi meant something special to her because she herself could never be entirely free, no matter how hard she tried to resist gender boundaries. In response, the gay man and the former yaoi fan wondered, why is an intelligent feminist like you choosing such a politically incorrect stance? The important part here is the even if it's discriminatory. It's not that she doesn't know, it's maybe not even that she doesn't care, but that she's still doing it and is still going to do it. If we take a look at the arguments that I did deem unsustainable, we will quickly find a pattern. Fujoshi isn't an empowering term. Fujoshi deflects the shame of erotica onto queerness. The Western card, you don't get to comment because where you are from. Was it made for the gays? This wasn't made for you, so your opinion is irrelevant. BL isn't meant to represent real gay men. This isn't about you, so you don't get to critique. And BL helps normalize queerness to a wider audience. Kind of breaks the pattern, but I disagree with this essentially because of things that are a result of how BL handles queerness, not the attitude of the people reading it. The pattern here is that the opinions or voices of queer people, but also very specifically gay and queer men, are being disregarded and ignored. The reason they are being ignored is because they are demanding changes to BL that certain readers fear would inhibit or minder the positive effects the female audience is getting from BL. In doing so, the possibility of harmful effects upon queer people is disregarded as irrelevant. To distill it into a single sentence, it seems that the Fujoshi as feminist discourse relies upon the acceptance of negative impacts on gay men if it brings about benefits for women. This right here, this is the core issue. This is why so many queer people, and specifically gay men, have issues with Boyslove. When I was working on this video, and I would encounter random feminist arguments, they usually had the intense ability to piss me off and disgust me massively. There was this vibe about them that I wasn't able to articulate for the longest time. And for the longest time, I was not going to include this in the video because I didn't know how to talk about this.
And I think that this might also be the case for other queer people. I think other people are also catching that vibe. The feeling of being used for someone else's benefit while being totally disregarded by that someone. I think that attitude, the disregard, is what's fueling this debate, why it's been going on so long, and why it's so reliably horrible. Here's the thing though. The women reading Boyslove have a reason for doing so. The women entering this debate aren't debating this in a vacuum either. The horrible arguments are coming from somewhere. They have a cause. Remember my mega quote from earlier, how I focused on the even if? The sentence keeps going on after that. The yaoi fan who had argued that yaoi is purely fantasy replied that she couldn't just let go of yaoi altogether, even if it's discriminatory, and that she explained that yaoi meant something special to her because she herself could never be entirely free, no matter how hard she tried to resist gender boundaries. The reason that woman is reading BL, the reason that woman is continuing to read BL despite being aware of its issues, and the reason why women like her might choose to disregard queer opinions is because they are trying to get away from the patriarchy, a system that dehumanizes them to no end. The reason queer voices are ignored is because some of the female readers of BL fear that listening to those voices will take away one of the few or maybe even only escapes they have. The feminists trying to defend BL don't see queer people critiquing a genre depicting them. They see gay men, heavy emphasis on the men, trying to push them out of one of the few spaces where they can exist in without being dehumanized. Remember Rebecca Snyder? She's the one who wrote the "Fujoshi as feminist relies upon the acceptance of negative impacts upon gay men" quote. It was like a pivotal point in this 2-hour video, you may remember. Rebecca finishes her essay or paper, I'm not quite sure what it is, with the words, "In the end, each group and their respective discourse are based upon self-interest." I don't agree with that, because the self-interest of both groups, once clearly laid out and articulated, align perfectly. If women want to get away from the patriarchy, then accurate depictions of queerness are perfect for them. If queer people want mainstream media that represents us accurately, then the buying power of straight women is a solid way to get that. If women want to stew relationships not based on gender differences, then gay romance not constructed around yet another made-up gender binary with basic notions of consent is exactly what they're looking for. If queer people and women are both trying to find media that shows an alternative world, why not listen to and work with another group mutually disaffected and dehumanized by the patriarchy and systems built around gender essentialism? Our interests not only align, they are identical. There is nothing being lost on either side by having accurate and respectful representation that is also enjoyed by straight women. I can assure you that I, as a queer person, would not mind a straight woman reading a good, representative, respectful Boyslove. What I do mind is a non-intersectional winner-takes-all mindset that's preventing us from achieving anything for either side and stopping us from addressing real harm caused by the issues in our genre. Now, if that isn't enough for you, let me tell you a little secret. There's a reason I've been specifying straight women in a lot of cases when applicable. Both sides often forget this, which can be very bizarre to see play out, but queer women do also exist, and they do also read Boyslove. Here's the numbers. So if we slam the numbers I dug out together, we get an average 56% of heterosexual readers of BL. That means about 44% of BL readers are queer. If we compare that to the average amount of male readers I found, which is 17.62%, you will quickly notice that 44% is larger than 17.62%. AKA, there's a lot of queer women who read BL. Also, I'm bad at math and there's probably a better way to do this, but you get the idea. Also, please keep in mind what I said like 2 hours ago, because this video is turning into a massive undertaking that's longer than entire movies, and I don't expect you to remember this, but these numbers are just kind of slammed together, various studies, various methodologies, various countries, so they're not necessarily, this isn't a scientific number, it's more of a vibe. Not only do the interests of both groups align wonderfully, the two groups themselves also overlap to a large degree. The common interest is easily served once it has been articulated. the interests of queer people and women align, but also on this specific topic because both groups are oppressed by gender essentialism. But I would also like to be clear about something. Even if we managed to transform BL into a queer feminist wet dream of a genre, there would be other topics from other groups that would be brought up, like racism or ableism, stigmata towards people with mental health issues, homelessness, etc., etc. These topics are inherently queer and feminist topics, in part because our communities overlap with people who are affected by these topics, and also because these groups are inherently affected by the same systems that affect us. When these topics are brought up, both in a BL context and outside of it, they should be welcomed and engaged with a desire to learn and to articulate a better future for everyone. Oppression can only be ended by intersectionality. The idea that one group can free itself without also freeing others is insane. One's own oppression does not mean one cannot also be having an unintended negative effect on other groups or even within their own group, and it does not absolve one from a responsibility towards others. The future is intersectional. For the ladies and gentlemen at home, we are now closing in on midnight. My friend Henri came over at, 10:30? I think it was 10:30. 10:30. So, anyway. Now, in the video, I said that I would like to present a workable ending that doesn't just end on everything sucks. The ending I did give is kind of highly theoretical and not very concrete to BL and its situation and what we should do there. And to be honest with you, I got no idea. I'm not a writer of BL or a publisher, and hell, I'm not even that into BL compared to other people, and there are a lot of people involved in this genre. But I also think there's a benefit to keeping it vague. I'm not telling you what exactly to do because I don't know you, your situation, or your capabilities. What I'm trying to do is encourage you to try and articulate stuff. What is your situation? What are your capabilities? What is bothering you and why and how do you feel about it, etc., etc., etc. Because I think that's a fundamental skill that's really important and that a lot of people don't take enough time to do. If you want to change the world, you kind of need an idea of what about it is bothering you and what about it you would like to change or how you would like to change it. And I kind of think that's the whole point of this video. I tend to have very subtle political messaging in my videos, and there usually tends to be kind of an overall theme that forms itself while writing the video. And I didn't really know what it was going to be when I started writing this video, but pretty quickly after I started up again after a few months, I noticed that it was going to be intersectionality and the ability to articulate stuff. And I was really happy about that because I think intersectionality is one of the most important concepts in general, and I think it's extremely important to spread awareness of it. Also, a friend of mine asked me what the point of this video is, because obviously I'm not going to change how a massive literary genre operates. This video probably won't even be seen by that many people. If it doesn't get at least 12K, I'm going to cry because my last video got 12K, and it was way less work. And my answer to him was that I'm making this video less to change Boyslove, although I obviously still hope that this might do that in some minuscule way, and more to give a live example of how intersectional thinking can help solve problems, help articulate stuff, and provide a vision for a better alternative. And so if someone ends this video and is able to figure out their shit a bit better because of it, that's fine by me. If someone ends this video and is able to integrate intersectionality into their politics and dealings with other people, I think that's great. Also, because I am staying vague on solutions and only really commenting on a specific situation, I think it makes what I'm saying more widely applicable in a way. If I gave you broad sweeping solutions, those wouldn't be applicable to most situations, and even to the ones it would be applicable to, those situations would change eventually, and then we would be right where we started. But try and figure out why people do the stuff they do, and there's different structures of oppression to keep that in mind, isn't really anything that's going to go out of style soon. On a more personal note, I'm really stressed about this video. I've been working on it for like over a year. It's a very heated topic. I'm very worried about how people will be receiving this. I've been recording this fucking video for 10 hours. I'll probably be promoting this to people who have a very good chance of hating my guts. If Fujoshis or TERFs see this video, I'm going to have a very hostile comment section. And I'm really worried that I made some genuine crucial mistake that will just fuck up my entire chain of argumentation. Obviously, I've been doing my best to keep my shit and my facts in order, but this is also like a 25k word doc that I'm reading off of, and it's not even the only Google Doc that I have. I've been working on this long enough to forget some stuff 3 times over, and it's not exactly like the topic is being laid out for me. So if I did make any mistakes, I'm very sorry. And if there's any stuff you disagree with or have further thoughts about, please let me know in the comments. Be nice. And if you want to, subscribe, because by the time I release another video, you will have forgotten all about me. We're done. That's the video. Fuck me. God.